Coming soon to own on video cassette.
Let me ask you something. What's something you find scary? Or more specifically, what makes something scary? While each person has their own phobias and fears, I'd argue what makes something scary is the absence of what's known, or what's perceived as normal. When we see animals in the wild, we often infer cuteness or docility from them, since we share similar traits to those in the wild. 4 limbs, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a hinged mouth, an endoskeleton, or sometimes it's just the harmlessness they pose to humans. But a lot of times, a commonality between what people fear comes into conflict with these shared characteristics. The uncanny valley exists because we inherently understand what makes something human, and when that understanding clashes with what we're shown, our brain has a noticeable negative reaction to it. Some predict it's a primal instinct from back when we shared the world with Neanderthals, but I'm no anthropologist. Movies and video games are a great way of capturing this feeling because the audience is guided into seeing their story through a certain lens, allowing tension, atmosphere, and intrigue to rise at the whims of the editor. With video games, that's a much harder sell. Video games have the benefit of having the audience interact with the world around it, but in doing so, the exact timing and plot threads can be overlooked by the player's actions, causing disinterest. Another issue can be loss of tension through death. Dead Space is an excellent setting for a horror premise, but because the later games are so centric on its combat, consistent deaths can lead to the player feeling less and less afraid, since there's no reason to fight to survive if you're able to just come back at any time. This can break immersion, sure, but that also can turn a feeling of despair into dread and frustration pretty quickly. This problem runs rampant throughout the gaming sphere. Some games offer deterrent to multiple deaths, such as Dark Souls. Some games have permadeath system where your death restarts the whole game, but some games, more often than I'd like, just negate this aspect as a limitation of the medium. And I think this is a fair deduction to make when approaching the combat. But if that were the case, then I think an emphasis on locale and atmosphere should take center stage. Alien Isolation is a great example of this. When you start, you're powerless and afraid. The smallest thing can kill you, and when the xenomorph finally appears, you're given no other alternatives than to run and hide. But by the late game, you're able to repel them, and the fear comes not from the combat, but from the environment itself. The ship's tight spaces and rustic feel offer the player the feeling of constant tension, knowing that they could be jumped by anything at any time. This is also a prominent example for me because, in my eyes, Alien Isolation marked the end of a time period where AAA horror games were considered profitable, but since 2014, we're seldom blessed with a new higher budget horror game. There are some examples that are the exception to this rule, such as Outlast 2, Death Stranding, Resident Evil 7, and the Souls games, but aside the few outliers, we never really see that level of passion being put into a horror game. This was the brief entirety of what I had written following my completion of Scorn in late October. And while I can't say I'm unhappy with the verbiage or pacing I used, I can admit I'm further embarrassed by the notion of having left another project on the cutting room floor. School's been taxing, relationships have come and gone, jobs have taken up my time and energy, and the ever-worsening state of everything around me has swept up any motivation I'd have for making new content, be that drawing or otherwise. I can't get back the time I've wasted, or take back the words I've uttered, nor can I shake this persistent feeling of inadequacy that's lingered since the beginning of that last Halo video. But I can try my best to be better. I can avenge the lesser person I was and find solace in knowing I've made one step closer to finding peace in both myself and my actions. So with that, I'll try to make this video shorter. It's been quite some time since I've been able to have a visceral reaction from any game I've played. Soma left me with existential dread, Spec Ops left me with a crippling guilt and uncertainty, Even the Blair Witch's dog scene had me dreading every second I had to consider leaving my best friend behind, but at the end of the day, these feelings begin to fade with time. It's incredible that this medium has so many amazing titles that can compel their audience to have such a guttural reactions and even break into tears at times. However, while diving into the more obscure titles in my Steam library, I've come to realize that these feelings are sometimes best left unchecked. Back in early May, a creator by the name of Super Eyepatch Wolf uploaded a video on this obscure RPG Maker game that he swore was one of the hardest yet most riveting games he'd ever played. Curious, I picked up a copy of it on sale and started playing it. Then I died. Again, and again, and again. This game is bullshit. The enemies were relentless. The RNG was punishing. The visuals were some of the most sickening I've ever been subjected to. Yet I couldn't stop playing it. While other IPs had just faded into the obscure contents of my brain over time, this game never left. When I was at work, I'd be thinking about it. When I slept, I'd dream about it. When I was with my friends, I couldn't stop talking about it. And even after a couple weeks of avoidance, I still can't get it off my mind. A game with seemingly cookie-cutter graphics and a relatively simple soundtrack, all built into a rudimentary game engine that has become the bane of my very existence. And it still lingers in my mind as something to be respected, yet forever feared. Created almost entirely by Miro Havarinen, this AO-rated dungeon crawler is one of the most amazing horror games I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. Not because of its inherent scariness, but because of your involvement in its madness. Remember my trailer for the Spec Ops video, where I mentioned how it was a rough adaptation of Joseph Conrad's book, taking a dive into madness? Well, this, in my opinion, is a far better representation of that very concept. They don't share really any narrative threads, mind you, but you, the player, can often find yourself at the mercy of this game's very mechanics and wonder, why am I subjecting myself to this? And that's just it. I don't know. As I brought up earlier, my feeling of inadequacy was a recurring theme for what I wanted to address in this video, using this as a series of healthy coping mechanisms for my own journey of self-betterment. But at the end of the day, the very notion of such a journey became less and less compelling when every game I played kept representing a feeling of accomplishment I, myself, was nowhere close to sharing. However, as sad as that may sound, this game reminded me that there is an inherent truth that we often like to shun. I'm weak. This isn't a response that's meant to invoke pity, but rather it's a fact of life that I think so many of us are quick to overlook. We ride in mental bhaktis that can crush us in an instant. We work for jobs that reap benefits that we'll often never see. We inhabit giant land masses that feud with neighboring superpowers we can barely comprehend, and all the while battling natural forces that surround us and oh so often make rubble of the very towering structures and civilizations we covet so highly. And to escape this cruelty, we often project ourselves onto fictional characters we know we can never really replicate. Super strength, magical powers, dimension hopping, discovering new worlds, saving innocents from tyrannical threats. Ideas that remind us of our childlike imagination where our world was new and our naivete was at the forefront. Not this time. Fear and hunger threw me into this fire. It gave me a stick and said, do with what you've got. It wasn't easy, it wasn't friendly, and it wasn't even pleasant most of the time, but it didn't care. It didn't cheat you with broken bosses, it didn't bullshit you with empty promises of saving a distressed hostage, it just pointed you at the door and threw you to the dogs. Literally. I've never felt this respected by a game. I've never felt as though my resolve were being more tested by a game. The enemies were gnarly and haunting, the consequences were costly and gut-wrenching, the interactions were confusing to navigate and seemingly pointless, but the deeper I ventured and the longer I sunk my time into it, the more I realized that I'd never felt like a game had been more fair to me than this. Sure, I die constantly, but the combat was mostly avoidable. Sure, I lost party members, but it was because I was careless in my tactics. Even the most randomized factors of this experience rely on 50-50 odds, the most fair the odds can be. This game definitely isn't for everyone. In fact, I rarely say it's for anyone. However, if you're like me and have longed for a game that will leave you with an actual feeling, and if you don't mind a game where you can literally get dismembered with no censorship of any kind, then I highly recommend this game. It's only $8 on Steam and you can even run it on a Steam Deck for those who have them, so give it a shot if you can. And that's all I'll say for now. It's a short playthrough, averaging around 5 to 6 hours. I've seen many reviews and explanations for this game, but the one I found really aspirational was its resemblance to an art exhibit. You walk around, make your own interpretations, and you leave with an arguably unique experience than that of your peers. And I like to subscribe to the notion that interpretations of art should not be empirical. I think those who like feeling unnerved and afraid should try this game out before diving in deeper into its potential themes and morals. Your eyes are the gateway to your soul, as cheesy as that sounds, so your own thoughts and experiences should drive your interpretation of this game's meaning, rather than having someone else's eyes retell their experience for you. I will warn you that this game is intentionally unsettling, and there are moments that even made me uneasy, but when I finally came out of Scorn's world, I was left with a completely different feeling and meaning than those I watched reviews on afterwards, and I would hate to have that new perspective tainted or squandered by my own interpretation. I realize that by making these videos for others, I eventually lose all sense of passion and self that drove me to want to make it to begin with. So keep in mind, this video is entirely my own perspective and my own interpretation, based on my own personal experiences. In a way, this video is kind of like my own private therapy entry, rather than an objective take or review. You shouldn't have the same outlook as me, and I relish in hearing how this game made you feel. So please, let me know your thematic takeaway in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on it, and if this is where you drop off, I hope you have a lovely day.